welcome back to my channel. My name's Rachel and this is Stitched Up. So thank you for joining me for another sew along with me. Today's video is going to be part one of making this, which is the Vernazza swimsuit by Friday Pattern Company. Now I've made this before, I've made two for my daughter last year, and I decided that, you know, what else are we going to do when we're on lockdown globally at the moment? All we can dream of is summer holidays, isn't it? And what better time to make a swimsuit? So yeah, I decided that I was going to make myself one of these and parade around the house in it. What more can I say? So the first part of this video is going to be making the bikini top, which is here, which is this lovely little top. Okay, so we're going to be making this actual garment. If you're interested in watching how it all comes together and sewn with lycra, then stay tuned. Right, so first thing you need to do is trace out all your pattern pieces according to the size that you're making, and I've done that. And then you cut out your lycra. You want to cut out the front out of your main fabric and your lining fabric. You need two of those. Your back is cut on the fold, so you need one in your main fabric and one in your lining fabric. Now you have the bottoms. The back again is cut on the fold, one out of your main fabric and one out of your lining. The front again on the fold, out of your main fabric and your lining. You have a top waistband cut out of main fabric and lining, again on the fold, one of those, and then one bottom waistband out of main fabric and lining, again on the fold. So that's all your pattern pieces. In addition, you will need some swimwear elastic. Now this is swimwear elastic. This is the kind that I'm using, which is actually made of rubber, and I bought this from Walton's, but you can get it online. It's really cheap. I think in Walton's it's about 15 pence for a metre, something like that. So if you can see, it's like super stretchy, and with this being rubber, it means that it's going to last really well. So when you're swimming in your swimwear in chlorinated water, then this won't degrade very well, so it adds longevity to your swimming costume. The measurements for the size that you're making are included in the pattern, and you will need two pieces for your legs, two pieces for your armhole, and one long piece for the neckband, okay, which is this one here. What I do is I write on these. When I've cut them out, I write on them. So like that one, I've written arm, so I know which one is which, basically. Otherwise you end up having to measure them again halfway through your sewing. So they're my two arm pieces there. This one is my neckband, and then there's one of my leg pieces there. That's my other leg piece right there. So that's what you need for your swimwear elastic. The stitch length and width are marked in the pattern instructions all the way through. It does vary depending on which part you are sewing, but we'll see that as we work through the pattern and the instructions. So what we're going to do now is we're going to go to our sewing machine and we're going to start working on the main fabric piece first. So we're going to be working on the top first. So first things first, lay out your back piece right sides up like so, and then we're going to be pinning the front pieces at the shoulders and at the side seams. Right, so once you've got that pinned, we're going to take it to the sewing machine and we're going to stitch these seams with a 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. So we're just going to discuss setting up your sewing machine to sew your main pieces together. Now with lycra, obviously this is a 4-way stretch, so it stretches in all directions, and as I've mentioned before, 4-way stretch means that you will be able to stretch it out and it recovers one way and stretches out the other way and recovers. That's 4 ways, okay? when you are setting up your stitch, you want to be using a narrow zigzag stitch to stitch your main pieces together. I've used a stitch width of 1.2 and a stitch length of 1.5 so that it gives me a really narrow stitch, and that will create really good elasticity when you are putting this on and moving about in it. Now the other thing we need to look at is needles. So recommended needles for sewing lycra are something like this, a stretch needle, or these are super stretch needles. You have two types of needles for sewing stretch fabrics. Obviously your other fabrics are things like jerseys and knit fabrics, which you usually use a ballpoint needle for. You don't want to be using a ballpoint needle for sewing lycra because you can still get skipped stitches. So recommended needles for sewing lycra are stretch or super stretch, and a needle size of 11 or 14. These are 14, so I've already set up my sewing machine with one of these needles, and hopefully we shouldn't get any skipped stitches. Thread wise, you should use really just a normal polyester thread because it will last longer. So right, we are going to now stitch these side seams and shoulder seams together of our outer bikini top, and we're going to do that at 5/8 of an inch. So let's go. Right, so when you've done, you should get something that looks like that. Now I have still got a couple of skip stitches there, haven't I? But I'm not too concerned about that. It's going to be absolutely fine. When we open it out, it should look, you know, nice, and if you give it a really good pull, you can see there that it's holding, so that's fine. One other thing is I don't backstitch with a narrow zigzag because this is not going to come undone, so it just saves you a little bit of time. When you've sewn your shoulder seams and side seams of your bikini top together, you should have something that looks rather like that. So we're going to repeat and do exactly the same thing, but with our lining pieces. Right, so we've got the lining pieces pinned together, and we're going to sew the side seams and the shoulder seams exactly as we did with the main fabric. Right, so when you've sewn your lining pieces at the side seams and the top, what we need to do now is just trim down these seam allowances. So it doesn't give you a guide as to how far to trim them down, but I'm just going to do them sort of halfway. So we're going to repeat that for all of the seams on both the lining and the main fabric. going to attach the lining to the neckline of the lining piece. We're going to quarter our elastic for the neckband, so that's fairly simple. Just fold it in half, put a pin or a mark on your elastic to where that halfway point is, and then half it again from that point, which is about there. And then the same the other side. Which is there. So we've now got that into quarters. Okay, so moving to the neckline, you should have a little notch on the front bodice piece of the bikini top, and we're working on the wrong side of the fabric when we attach this. So starting at the notch with the end of your elastic, we're going to be working 5/8 of an inch in from the outer edge of the fabric. So the outer edge of your elastic needs to be 5/8 of an inch in from the outer edge of the fabric on the wrong side. And we're going to pin this in place at each of the quarter points. So the end of the elastic starts at the notch, and then the next quarter point attaches to the shoulder seam, like so. The next quarter point will attach at the centre back, which is just there, like so. That next marking attaches to the other shoulder seam, like so, and then the other end of the neckband piece will finish at the other notch on the other side of the front, like so. So what we're going to do now, I'm not going to pin anything else, I'm just going to use those marks as a guide for how I stretch it as I sew. We're going to take this to the sewing machine and we're going to get this sewn in. So now we are setting up the machine to sew our elastic in. So the pattern instructions recommend that we have a zigzag stitch with a stitch width of 5 for the elastic. So we'll just move that up to 5 and a length of 3. So that's that now set up, and what we're going to do is we're going to start at one end. When I find an end, there we go. So we've got our pinned fabric here, and remembering, I mean, I'm going to do this by eye, but obviously if you are inexperienced and, or should I say, more of a beginner and not quite sure of measuring distances, then you can use a little seam gauge just to measure 5/8 of an inch from the edge of your fabric there to the outer edge of your elastic. I'm going to do this stretching the elastic gently between each of the quarter points.
so that's now all stitched in and looking rather good.
So when your elastic is attached to your lining piece around the neckline, it should look something like that. So now we are going to attach the lining to the main fabric. So getting your main piece, your main bodice piece out like so, we're going to attach it right sides together, and we are going to start from one side here where my finger is, and we're just going to pin all the way around. So once it's all pinned together like that, we're going to take it to the sewing machine, and we're going to stitch this from one end here all the way round the back over to the front, round there, and finish here, leaving the bottom open like this. And we're going to stitch that at 1/2 inch seam allowance.
Now we are stitching the lining and the outer fabric together. I'm just altering the zigzag stitch back to my 1.2mm width and 1.5 length. Hopefully you can see that just there. There we go. Right, so we are starting at this edge here, and we're going to stitch at 1/2 inch. Alright, so when we've done that, it should all be nicely stitched like that. Now don't worry if you end up with something like this, it really doesn't matter. We're going to be trimming away all this excess anyway. As long as the lining and the outer fabric are flat together, that's all that matters, and that they're stitched together and you've not missed any seams, that's all that matters. So what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to go around with my pinking shears and just trim this excess away. So I'm just showing you how I am pinning the lining to the outer fabric. I'm joining up the seams, but if you notice, I'm leaving the lining poking out by approximately 1/4 of an inch. And this is a step that it tells you to do in the instructions, which is actually really, really good, because what this does is it means that it stretches your lining out so that when it's all constructed and together, it really tightens the lining, which means that it fits your body better, but also it means that the lining doesn't end up poking out when you're wearing it. So it's a really, really good tip to follow. So I'm just pinning the lining beyond the outer fabric of the armhole all the way around, and then what I'm actually going to do, rather than basting it on my sewing machine, I am going to overlock it, because this is going to show on the inside of your top, your bikini top, and I just want to make sure that it looks really as nice and neat as possible inside. Right, so that's one armhole pinned all together. I'm going to just take this to the overlocker and we're going to overlock it, but we need to make sure that we don't cut anything off the actual main fabric. It's fine to be cutting this off, but not off the lining, but not cutting any of the main fabric off. So you should end up with something that looks like that. Next, we are going to just create a loop with the armhole elastic, and we have a seam allowance on this of about 1/2 inch. So all I do is I place one side of the elastic underneath the presser foot, butting up to the 1/2 inch mark, and then the same with the other side, because I've got 1/2 inch marks on both sides of my foot plate. So, and then I'm just going to go back and forth in a zigzag stitch to make sure that that's really nice and secure. Oops, here we go. Making sure that you've not twisted your elastic. So that's one done, and then we're going to do exactly the same with the other one. There we go. Right, so next we're going to be working from the wrong side of the top, and we will just trim off those edges first. We need to be working from approximately half an inch in from the outer edge, so I'm going to pin probably around there, and then the other halfway point at the top of the shoulder seam, about there, and then we're going to essentially stretch between those 2 points. Pinning that side. Actually, just move it over just a touch, I think. You can measure this out exactly if you want, but I tend to go by eye and feel more than anything else. Yeah, so that feels about okay. So next we need our settings back to 5mm width and 3mm length, because we're stitching elastic again. I tend to start at the underarm seam now got the elastic in. Oh, we've got a couple of skip stitches there, haven't we? But yeah, generally we've got the elastic in on the inside of that, and the next thing we are going to do is we are going to take this to if you've got a cover stitch, then like I have, then you can top stitch this down using a cover stitch. If you haven't, you can do it on your sewing machine. As I say, my cover stitch I can't get to at the minute, which is why I've overlocked this. If you have a cover stitch machine, you don't need to overlock it, you can just baste it down and then it will sort that out when you overlock it. But I'm going to be doing this on my sewing machine, so I'm probably going to use a twin needle, I think. But before I do that, I'm going to just attach the elastic to the other side wherever it's gone. Here we go. So I'm going to do exactly the same on the other armhole with the side that you've either basted or overlocked, as I've done, working from the wrong side. I'm going to pin and stitch this in place, and then we'll see what that looks like. So I've set up my machine for twin needle, and to do this on my machine, every machine is different, but mine has like a little stand that comes up that I can put an additional spool of thread on, and it travels through the same threading mechanism and goes into my twin needle. But I also have to go into my menu, which is this one here, and switch on the twin needle setting. But obviously every machine is different, so but I just wanted to show you how I've done that, not forgetting to change my stitch to a straight stitch. So I have just done a test on a scrap of the lycra. I always recommend doing this if you're using anything like a twin needle or a cover stitch, and you always get a bit of tunneling with a twin needle, but you know, there's not really much you can do about it. And but anyway, it's working fine. So I'm now going to go ahead and move the coffee out of the way. I have pinned over the elastic onto the wrong side, and I'm going to start at the underarm seam and twin needle all the way round, and fingers crossed it works. Okay, so it should look something like that, which doesn't look too bad, does it? And it's nice and neat on the inside. Right, I'm going to go ahead and do the other armhole now, and then we're almost there. So here's how it's looking so far. We've got the lovely armholes all twin needled or top stitched, however you want to do it on your cover stitch. It's folding nicely at the front there with the little ties just there. If I just flip it round, now what you can see at the back, obviously the lining is poking out at the minute, but don't worry about that because we're going to be attaching the waistband next. And when we attach the waistband, we're going to be pulling this lining down like so. So it's going to hide anyway when the waistband is attached. So let's get on with the waistband next and get this top finished. Right, so we've got the waistband here, right sides together, and we're going to stitch at 5/8 of an inch between those two notches just there. And again, I've got my sewing machine settings on a zigzag stitch with a width of 1.2 millimeters and length of 1.5. Right, so I was just stitching the waistband to create a loop. Again, on my machine I've got it set at a zigzag of a width of 1.2 and a length of 1.5. So we should have a loop that looks something like that. So starting at one side, now that's all pinned together, we're going to stitch this all the way around. I'm just going to line that up a little bit better. So it's now all stitched together. We just need to, so we just need to now snip all these threads away. And then when you've removed all the extra little threads from the front seam, we're going to just overlock this seam. Again, if you've got a cover stitch, what you are supposed to do is fold down the waistband seam towards the waistband like that, and then cover stitch it all the way around. But because my cover, as I say, my cover stitch is out of the way at the minute, I am going to just overlock all this to make it nice and neat, and then I'm going to top stitch it down to the waistband seam through the front. So we'll do that now. Right, so I've just folded it inside out, and so as you can see, so that's the waistband from the front, and then from the inside it looks something like that. What we're going to do now is we are going to make sure that the waistband is folded down towards the waistband seam like that underneath, and then we're going to top stitch this all the way across. So I'm going to set up my machine for top stitching again. So I go into this button here, I click on twin needle, I'll set it at 2, tick OK, and at the minute obviously it's got the zigzag there, so I just change to the straight stitch, and as you can see it's now set up for top stitching. So I now need to bring up my other little whatever that's called and put my thread in, and I run it through the same threading mechanism, change my needle to my top stitching needle, and then we should be good to go. Right, so I have my waistband seam pointing towards the waistband, my top stitching needle is in, everything's set up, and we're ready to go. So there's the finished bikini top. It's got that nice little keyhole detail at the front, as you can see there, and the little ties. Obviously it doesn't fit my mannequin very well because I've not set my mannequin up at all, but you've got that lovely top stitching around the armholes, and as I mentioned earlier, because we pulled the lining down a little bit, it's now hidden inside. So yeah, really pleased with that. It takes a little bit of time, but you know, I hope you can see that it's actually really quite simple to sew lycra and not as scary as you might think. Now I haven't actually tried this on yet, and I may try it on and put some pictures in. Depends how brave I am. So I hope you've enjoyed part 1. Please, if you do have any comments, as always, leave them down in the comments box below. In part 2, we're going to be putting the bikini bottoms together, so watch out for that, which should be up very shortly. Hope you've enjoyed this video, and I'll see you again really soon. Take care, bye bye.